We've been talking about minor prophets on Sunday night, and going to talk a little bit about Habakkuk tonight, which he's a little different guy, because Habakkuk, unlike most of the minor prophets that we've talked about, he is a guy who speaks to God for the people instead of speaking to the people from God. So he's a little different in how he approaches things. But the neat thing about Habakkuk is he asks some age-old questions, questions we still ask today. So it's one of those things when you read this book, he asks questions that we all probably ask, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit. So he's a little bit different, only 3 chapters in the book of Habakkuk, a little different in how he approaches things. In Habakkuk 1:1-4, he asks a question. He says, "The prophecy of Habakkuk the prophet received, how long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, so that justice is perverted." You know, it's the question we ask, right? I mean, anybody that's ever lived probably asked this question if you believe in God, right? Why do bad things happen? You know, why are you doing it? But the unique thing about the first question Habakkuk asks is that he's asking it about Judah. He's in Judah, and he looks at Judah, and he says, why are you so wicked? Why do you let the wicked? Why is the law paralyzed? In other words, the law should make us righteous. The law should call us to God. The law should be what makes us good. But the law is paralyzed because, as Habakkuk says, the wicked hem in the righteous. You know, the idea that wickedness, the wicked hem in the righteous, wicked prevails. Why don't you help? Why don't you do anything? How long, right? How long must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? That's a real pertinent question. And it's a question throughout time, not just a question in the days of Habakkuk, but it's a question throughout time. Why do you do it? And so God answers him. God answers Habakkuk. And God answers him, and he says, "Look at the nations and watch, and be utterly amazed. For I'm going to do something in your days you would not believe, even if you were told." He says, "I'm raising up the Babylonians, the ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are a feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong. The horsemen come from afar. They fly like a vulture, swooping to devour." In the days of Habakkuk, the Babylonians hadn't come to power yet. This is kind of an interim period where the Assyrians are decreasing, the Egyptians are getting pushed back, and the Babylonians are just starting to come into power. Babylonians are starting to come into power, but not there yet. He says, "I'm going to tell you something you'll never believe. I'm going to bring the Babylonians to punish Judah." Right? Well, that's going to bring up another question. We'll get to that in a minute. And so he continues, and he says, "They all come bent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They mock kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all fortified cities. By building earthen ramps, they capture them. Then they sweep past like the wind and go on. Guilty people whose own strength is their God." You know, it's interesting. So Habakkuk says, looking at Judah, he says, how long will we let this go on? And God says, listen, I'm going to raise up the Babylonians. You won't believe it, but I'm going to bring up the Babylonians to punish Judah because Judah's so wicked. But then you think, well, why would you raise up another nation, an unrighteous nation? Why would you raise them up to punish Judah? Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just, heal Judah from within or do something that way? Why would you raise them up? So then Habakkuk asks the next question. He says, "Lord, are you not from everlasting, my God, my Holy One? You will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? So Habakkuk asked the next question. First question was, why do you let all this wickedness go on in Judah? What are you going to do about it? God says, I'm going to raise up the Babylonians. They're going to swoop down on them, capture them, punish them, take them off into captivity. But then Habakkuk asked the next question. Why do you get this unrighteous people, this Babylonians, to come in and execute judgment on Israel, to execute judgment on the righteous? Why do you do that? Why do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? You have made people like the fish of the sea, like the sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked pulls all of them up with hooks. He catches them in his net, gathers them up in his dragnet, so he rejoices, and he is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and burns incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food. Is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying nations without mercy? I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am going to give to this complaint. So Habakkuk asks the question, and he says, now I'm going to stand on the rampart, which is like the corner post of the wall of the city of Jerusalem. I'm going to stand on the rampart, and I'm going to wait to see what God says to me. How's God going to answer this? Why are you going to bring up a wicked people to punish people who are more righteous than that wicked nation Babylon? Why are you going to do that, God? Why would you do that? And Habakkuk replies to him, and he says, write down the revelation and make it plain, so on tablets, so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time, speaks of an end, and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come, will not delay. See, he is puffed up, and his desire is not upright, but the righteous will live by their faithfulness. Indeed, wine betrays him. He's arrogant and never at rest, because he is greedy as the grave, and his death is never satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations, catches all the people. Will not all of them tempt them with ridicule and scorn, saying, woe to him who piles up stolen goods. This idea that, so I'm going to take this wicked nation, I'm going to raise it up, I'm going to punish Judah. But then God kind of leads to the idea that, but the righteous are going to prevail. In other words, I'm going to punish this people, but there is hope for them. But he says there's a price to pay for what you've done. Judah, you've been insolent, you've been arrogant, evil has overcome you, you don't keep the law. This is the time when they didn't keep the law. This is the time when the law was disregarded. There was no law in Israel. There was no God in Israel, so to speak, if you really want to look at it that way. This is after Hosea. We talked about Hosea came up, and he was righteous, and he founded the book of the law, and he made all them reforms, and he got killed in the battle with Egypt. And after that time, we had two really wicked kings came up, and these wicked kings have totally, utterly destroyed everything good that Hosea did. The temple's in disarray. They're worshiping other gods. They totally went away from the path of God. So they've totally denied God. And so God says, listen, there's a price to pay. Your creditors will arise, right? In other words, there's a price. You've lived in your wickedness, but there's a price. Same thing that he basically told David when David had his sin with Bathsheba. He says there's a price to pay. You're going to pay it. The son's going to die. Your house is going to be in blood. Your wives are going to lay with your sons in broad daylight. You've sinned, and there's a price. Same thing he tells Judah. They will not wake up, make you tremble. You become their prey. Because you have plundered many nations, the peoples who are left will plunder you. For you have shed human blood. You have destroyed lands and cities, and everyone in them. Woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain, setting his nest on high to escape the clutches of ruin. You have plotted the ruin of many peoples, shaming your own house and forfeiting your life. In other words, God says, my justice is true. My justice is right. Even though you might not understand why I would raise up Babylon to come and destroy you, look at what you've done. What do you deserve? You deserve this. You've called this upon yourself, God would say. He says, the stones of the wall will cry out, and the beams of woodwork will echo. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by injustice. Has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labor is only fuel for the fire, that the nations exhaust themselves for nothing? God says, I'm righteous in what I'm doing. Look at what you've done. The thing about Habakkuk is Habakkuk speaks for all time. It's God's judgment on people who aren't godly. It's God's judgment on people who aren't righteous. It's God's judgment on people who do terrible things. Has this ever changed? Has this ever changed? Don't nations still do this today? Build themselves up with bloodshed? Don't they? Absolutely. It's a mortal book. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of all the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbors, pouring it from the wineskin until they are drunk so he can gaze on their naked bodies. He's talking about how they reacted with the nations around them, what they did to the people around them. He says, now it's your turn. Drink and let your nakedness be exposed. A cup from the Lord's right hand is coming around to you, and disgrace will cover your glory. The violence you have done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, and your destruction of animals will terrify you. For you have shed human blood. You have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. You know, God a lot of times told him to go destroy nations, didn't he? Destroy nations, wipe them out. But a lot of times they overstepped even what God would have them to do. God's a God of mercy, right? God's a God of grace. And yet Israel had become a nation that was not merciful nor graceful, a nation who had rejected God, who had destroyed the nations around them. He says, what value is an idol that someone has carved, or an image that teaches lies? For those who make them trust in their own creations, they make idols that cannot speak. Woe to him, he says, wood come to life, or to a lifeless stone wake up. Can it give guidance? It is covered with gold and silver. There's no breath in it. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. He says, you've trusted in your hands. You've trusted in the works of your hands. You've trusted in what you did. He says, can that prevail? Can that ever work? And the answer is no. There's no breath in those things. There's no life in those things. He says, I'm life. I'm life. I'm in my holy temple. You need to be silent before me. You can't trust in things that you make, things that you do, the works of your hands. The thing about this book is that it speaks of to me, I think of the end of time when I read this book. When God comes in the last day, and it's going to be like, well, that's not right, right? All these people get destroyed, and God's going to say, you brought it on yourself. You know, I never rejected you, you rejected me. Look at what you serve. You serve what you make with your hands. You serve what you build. That has no breath, no life in it. Instead of serving me. You know, I hear this prayer in Habakkuk 3, 1 through 2. It's the prayer of Habakkuk the prophet. It says, Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds. Lord, renew them in our day. In our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. I think that's a really powerful prayer. In wrath, remember mercy. You know, even though they're going to get carried off, even though Babylonians going to carry them off, God's going to bring them back. There's still mercy in this. God wants to teach them a lesson, teach them that they need to serve him. They need to listen to him. I like the end of Habakkuk. It says, I heard and my inward parts trembled. At the sound, my lips quivered. Decay enters my bone, and in my place I tremble, because I must wait quietly for the day of distress, for the people to arise who will invade us. Habakkuk knows this is going to happen, not a question. Nothing Habakkuk can do to stop it. Nothing he can do to make it not happen. You know, and people say, well, why do you care about the Old Testament? Why do you read these Old Testament prophets? 2,600 years ago, right? Habakkuk was written 2,600 years ago. That's a long time, right? That's a long time. But you know, when I read what he writes here, I think, isn't that how we're waiting on? We're waiting on the Lord to come again. We're waiting on him to destroy this earth, destroy everything in it. We know it's coming. I can't stop it. You can't stop it. Nobody can stop it. When I read the words of Habakkuk, I think how dreadful and terrible that day is going to be, right? How terrible is that day going to be? I wait, and in my place I tremble, because I must wait quietly for the day of distress, for the people to arise who will invade us. Though the fig tree should not blossom, there be no fruit in the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail, and the fields produce no food, though the flocks should be cut off from the fold, there be no cattle in the stalls. Habakkuk says, yet I will exult in the day of the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and he has made my feet like hinds' feet to make me walk on my high places for the choir. He says, even though it's going to happen, he says, I rejoice in the day of the Lord. I'm going to rejoice in my salvation. Habakkuk understands, as God would tell them, that this is for their own good, right? This is for their own good. I'm going to punish you. I'm going to destroy you, but I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to bring you back. There'll be a remnant. I'm going to save. I'm going to bring you back to Jerusalem. I'm going to rebuild Jerusalem. But you need to learn from what you've done. You need to learn from your mistakes, because God says, I'm righteous. That's what he tells Habakkuk. He says, I'm righteous. He says, you've brought this on yourself, and now you have to face my judgment, but I'm a righteous God. Strong book, powerful book. Questions we ask today. Why do you let the wicked happen? Why do you let this happen? And just like Habakkuk, we should be saying, I'm waiting on the day, because the day will come when the Lord is going to exact his vengeance. The Lord is going to punish the ungodly, and the Lord is going to reward the righteousness. He is the God of my salvation, but for those who are wicked, he is the God of their destruction. Habakkuk is an immortal, timeless book. Might take time to read it. Only 3 chapters. You can do it in 10 minutes. Thanks for your time tonight. If I can help you in any way, won't you let it be known?